Hey everyone, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. Today we are going to have a exclusive episode about an exclusive report from Reuters that came out on Friday that Nvidia wants to complete in ASICs.
Happy day after Super Bowl, everyone. We're going to Monday morning quarterback this report that some may have read over the weekend that maybe Nvidia is gunning for business that Broadcom and Marvell dominate. We're going to peel some things back from this and reveal hopefully some insights into these companies' business models and give you a more accurate understanding of what's going on.
We should probably start with defining exactly what type of semiconductor we're talking about when we say ASIC. ASIC. What exactly is an ASIC?
Yeah, an ASIC, this stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit. So the hint there, application specific, it means this is a custom designed chip. There's, let's call it two general types of chips. There's merchant silicon. You'll hear this tossed around a bit, especially in Broadcom's earnings calls. You'll hear CEO Hock Tan talk about their big merchant silicon business. Very simply, these are not custom designed chips. They're off the shelf, general purpose. Customer can buy it, use it for what it's generally intended for, and it's good to go. Then there's the ASIC, or you'll hear custom silicon thrown around a lot. This is an application-specific semiconductor for as many applications as you can think of for computing technology. There's probably an ASIC that exists for something. Just maybe an example, aerospace and defense. Let's say there's a new drone design or a new fighter jet, or maybe an AI algorithm that's used for some other defense system. Military has very specific needs, and it obviously does not want anyone else to know how it powers that system or device. So they'll hire a custom silicon designer to craft something very specific to their very specific needs, and then make sure that custom silicon design stays under wraps, that it's only theirs.
But when we hear ASICs in the media, generally what we're speaking about, and especially in these times, is AI, custom AI chips, cloud computing chips. So I feel like maybe we need to just clear that up before we start diving into it. We're not talking about these very specific top secret semiconductors, at least in the same sense.
Yeah, naturally. We're not talking about the whole ASIC market here, including in this Reuters report, which we have a link to. They're talking about cloud computing and especially generative AI infrastructure, because that is all the rage right now. And for the duration of the last year plus, all of the cloud giants, Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle Cloud, a lot of very specific Gen AI data center startups have been prioritizing these types of chips, these types of data centers, and deprioritizing the, now I guess we're going to call it legacy cloud compute infrastructure, which is really not that old. The 2010s was just a few years ago, and the cloud is still very much a growth market, but lots of accelerated computing, AKA AI chips, getting added to the already massive footprint of data centers out there in existence.
The claim is here that Nvidia has started a new ASIC unit, which is trying to compete with Broadcom and Marvell's ASIC businesses.
Yeah, that's right. And it's mentioned here, Broadcom and Marvell dominate the ASIC industry. But again, what we're talking about here specifically is these generative AI and, more generally speaking, cloud computing accelerated compute networking business. So just a reminder, there's three basic ingredients to a data center and to any computing unit, really. You have your processor. And so in this case, we're talking about GPUs, NVIDIA's GPUs that accelerate computing workloads, historically CPUs, central processing units. You have your memory that holds all of the data that might be needed for a computing system. And then you have networking chips. And that's what stitches all of it together. It could be CPU to GPU, networking, GPU to GPU networking to create these really, really big GPU clusters that can be used all together to accelerate AI training. Of course, memory to GPU, memory to CPU networking. This third leg of the stool here, the networking, is the data center ASIC business that Broadcom and Marvell kind of dominate, we'll say.
NVIDIA already has an ASIC business. This is not a new development. We have an example of what they've been working on, which was announced all the way back in early 2022 before generative AI craze took over. And so NVIDIA can customize this stuff for clients. So is this really a threat to Broadcom and Marvell?
Well, sure. Of course it is, but it's not a new development. Like you just said, Casey, with the example here, NVIDIA has been developing these custom networking infrastructure pieces. We're not even going to call it chips because really what we're talking about is multiple chips pieced together to create a system. And that's really, I think, what is misunderstood here. Oftentimes, the word chip is thrown around interchangeably now for a whole computing system. And that's really a misnomer because even the GPU itself is not a chip. It's not a single chip. There's actually a lot of chips that go together to build a GPU. A GPU is actually a unit, a module, a whole computing system into of itself. So oftentimes what happens with these ASICs is a company has IP. And we can use our semiconductor industry flow chart here to talk about this. This is a nice segue from the bit that we did on ARM holding on Friday, which is a big holder of IP for mobile CPUs historically. A lot of these chip designers have their own IP that they use to make their own chips and their own systems. And a company that wants an application-specific design is basically going to license and pay royalties for the use of that IP. And oftentimes what they're doing is they're grabbing different pieces of IP, maybe from the same company, maybe from different companies, stitching it together to make an application-specific integrated circuit or a full-blown module. In this case, let's say a networking module in this example that you showed. So they've already had this going for years. And even before 2022, this is an example of some application-specific designs NVIDIA was working on at the time. You go back to 2020, NVIDIA, remember they acquired Mellanox, a leader in networking IP. So again, this is not new. NVIDIA has already been kind of encroaching on the turf of Broadcom and Marvell for quite some time.
Let's talk about some of the figures that were quoted in this report. It said that Broadcom and Marvell currently dominated the ASIC market, with Marvell at $2 billion and Broadcom at $10 billion. Where do we think those numbers came from?
It's not hard to figure it out. Put links to our last Broadcom and Marvell videos here. Interestingly enough, the trailing 12-month revenue, data center specific revenue for Broadcom and Marvell is $10 billion and $2 billion, respectively. And it's also not accurate because the data center and networking businesses of Broadcom and Marvell are not 100% application specific designs. On the contrary, most of it is merchant silicon, especially Broadcom. They're pretty clear about that. CEO Hock Tan, very clear about merchant silicon being the bulk of the business.
Take a look at this chart that Broadcom released in the spring of 2022. This is their custom ASIC revenue by end market. Fiscal year 2021, routing and switching just under $800 million, and then compute offload just under $1.6 billion. So combined, just over $2 billion in their ASIC part of their revenue for data centers.
Yeah. And in fiscal 2021, they were just shy of $8 billion in total networking and data center sales. So the ASIC business, 25%, 30% of Broadcom's networking and data center sales overall. So even less in total across all of Broadcom's different end markets. We'll show you the chart here from the most recent quarter. We covered this in December after Broadcom's fiscal year 2023. Now, granted, the data center and networking business is bigger now, and the ASIC portion of that in this Gen AI craze is probably going up, but it is not 100% of revenue. It's not a 10 billion ASIC data center and AI business. It's probably something more like maybe 1/3 on a good quarter. So this will evolve over time, but I think just to reiterate the point, this ASIC market that is being talked about as being 12 billion in total right now and headed for 30 billion in the next year or two, I don't think these numbers are accurate.
Just for reference, that compute offload customer mentioned on earnings calls most likely is Google. They've kind of spilled the beans on that a little bit. Broadcom is helping design the custom and proprietary tensor processing unit, or TPU, in its data centers.
And again, this is, I think maybe just to reiterate the point, Google and the other cloud giants at this point are in no way remotely capable of replacing Nvidia. What they're trying to do is they have some specific application within their data centers where maybe they can get better energy consumption, maybe they can get more efficient compute performance out of something that they design for themselves, but they're still utilizing the IP of companies like Broadcom, Marvell, and Nvidia. And maybe just to really drive this point home, Marvell CEO Matt Murphy, who was also mum on how big their ASIC business actually is as a percentage of their data center and networking sales, he did say this in recent quarters reports on the earnings calls that one of these big cloud computing customers, like let's say Google Cloud with their TPU, typically has to be willing to spend at least $1 billion over the lifetime of an ASIC project for it to be worthwhile. These are big spending commitments. And so whenever you hear these media reports saying that whoever, take your pick, AWS, Microsoft, Azure, Meta, Facebook, IG and their big data centers, whoever it is, they're not actually replacing NVIDIA, Broadcom, Marvell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're just utilizing those companies' IP to make their own custom design. Maybe it's a custom chip, maybe it's a custom computing module. It doesn't matter. They're getting the IP from someone. They're not reinventing the wheel here.
So I guess ultimately the comment that NVIDIA is a threat is of course true. All these companies are in competition with each other to some extent. They've long been very complementary to one another, but in the same token, they have some competing segments as well. Broadcom's lending its hand to Google's TPU is a bit of an encroachment on NVIDIA's accelerated computing-centric business. NVIDIA has always been a threat. It will always continue to be a threat. Broadcom and Marvell, of course, are also somewhat of a threat to NVIDIA.
Yeah. And I like your point here, Casey, that it's actually a pretty collaborative market. And all of these companies have various IP patents that are their own. And just one more case in point here. This has kind of been an ongoing case here, and it's only in Germany at this point, but Broadcom had levied an accusation against Netflix for infringing on its patent for streaming video technology. And Germany just awarded Broadcom a very small, modest settlement of $7.5 million. This is just one single patent, one single piece of IP that Broadcom owns. And all of these companies have very extensive libraries of IP. And they're not going to just be simply uprooted by a cloud giant that decides one day, hey, I'd like to design my own custom chip, because they're not actually designing their own custom chip. They're borrowing the IP and paying these companies for its usage to make something that's application specific versus the bulk of their portfolios that they design and sell to the market being merchant silicon, ready to go off the shelf stuff. So I think this is important information to keep in mind because we are still going to get so much AI hyped content from the media, and it can be very misleading for investors if you're trying to make a well-balanced decision on what you should own for the long term. So hopefully this was helpful.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode. We have Enphase Energy coming up later this week, which we did not get a chance to do last week after earnings, but there's been a lot of discussion on this company and the solar energy industry as well on our Discord channel. So if you haven't checked that out and you're a member, please join the Discord channel. After you've connected your membership on YouTube or on our Ko-fi page, you have access to the Discord channel as well as all of our video show notes on there as well.
And then tonight, Monday night alone, we have some favorites. Casey, your favorite, one of your personal favorites, Lattice Semiconductor reporting, Cadence Design Systems, Arista Networks, Monday.com. It's going to be a busy week. So again, maybe just a plug here. If you're looking for all of our notes, you can find our show notes on the Ko-fi shop or over on the Discord channel for some extras besides just what we're able to get out in video form.
If you have not subscribed, please do so. Hit that subscribe button and make sure your notifications are set to on. We'll see you all again later this week at Chipstock Investor.